Hello again. Tonight, I told you the story of an old heartbreak that returned wearing a dark suit, carrying white roses, and bringing half-hearted apologies. Before we begin, if stories like this interest you, you can find uncensored and very steamy stories on my Patreon page. Details are in the description. The last time Camille Mercer left me standing in a room full of people, I was 17, wearing a silver dress my mother had hemmed by hand and pretending not to hear the exact moment our entire senior class realized I had been abandoned. 10 years later, I walked into a glass conference room on the 32nd floor of Mercer Vale Studio, saw her at the head of the table in a dark suit with her hair pinned back from that impossible face, and understood with humiliating clarity that heartbreak can survive adulthood, rent payments, promotions, and all the other practical things people mistake for healing. She looked up when my name was said. Not the startled kind of looking. Not theatrical. No dropped pen. No visible shock. Camille had always possessed the kind of self-control that made other people feel made of loose paper. Her gaze landed on me, held for one breath too long, and then sharpened into professionalism so clean it almost felt insulting. "Ms. Reyes," she said. My body remembered her before my mind did. That was the worst part. The old injury was immediate, yes, a deep and private bruise pressed without warning, but beneath it there was something far more dangerous. Recognition. The line of her mouth, the stillness in her shoulders when she was holding too much, the low velvet note in her voice that used to make me tell her things I'd never told anybody else. I hated that she still had this effect on me. I hated that after 10 years, one syllable of my surname in her mouth could make me feel 17 and furious and embarrassingly alive at the same time. I took the empty chair halfway down the table because it was the furthest one from her without becoming ridiculous about it. Around me, people arranged laptops, legal pads, coffee cups with tasteful matte lids. The city spread itself in silver behind the windows. I had spent the train ride rehearsing calm, competent gratitude for this job, the kind of gratitude expected from a woman who had finally been recruited into one of the most respected design and strategy firms in the city after years of clawing my way upward through smaller agencies and impossible clients and underpaid freelance work. I had not rehearsed this. There had been no practical script for discovering that my new boss was the same woman whose silence had once taught me what humiliation tasted like. Camille turned her attention to the room. "Before we start, welcome to the newest members of the senior team." There it was again, that voice. Controlled. Elegant. All edges hidden under silk. No one else could have known that 10 years ago she used that same tone to whisper my name in the back room of Belladonna Florals while I tied ribbon around centerpieces after school. No one else could have known she once kissed me with flower dust on both our hands, and her blazer folded neatly over a crate because she was scared of wrinkling it. In this room, she was simply Camille Mercer, founder, creative director, woman with profiles in magazines, and a reputation for impossible standards. To everyone else, I was the hire from Calder and Finch, who had built a reputation for turning anxious companies into stories people wanted to believe. To me, she was also the girl who let me stand under a collapsing paper moon while her mother told me, very softly and very clearly, that I was not good enough. The meeting moved on. Introductions, current accounts, a hospitality rebrand in Lisbon, a cultural center pitch in Chicago, a new beauty client everyone seemed both thrilled and mildly afraid of. I took notes because taking notes gave my hands something to do besides shake. "Ms. Reyes will be leading narrative strategy on the Bellwether account," Camille said. "Her portfolio speaks for itself, but for anyone who missed the internal share, her redevelopment campaign for the Dockline Arts District increased community investment by 31% in a year. We're lucky to have her." It was only professional praise, clean and appropriate. The kind a boss gives in a room full of colleagues, but something in me went tight and strange anyway. Camille had once been the person whose approval mattered more than oxygen. Then she had become the person I built myself in spite of. Hearing her say, "We're lucky to have her," felt less like praise and more like someone touching an old scar with warm fingers. I kept my face neutral. "Thank you." Her gaze met mine for a fraction of a second. Unreadable. Then she moved on. By noon, I knew 3 things. First, the office was as beautiful and controlled as a museum. Smoked glass, pale oak, textured stone, a faint scent of cedar, and expensive coffee. Second, everybody here was very good at pretending not to notice the emotional weather in a room until it became profitable to mention it. Third, I was going to have to become excellent at breathing around Camille Mercer without letting it show. My desk was near the windows in the strategy bullpen, angled toward a wall of pinned concepts and material boards. Someone had left a welcome basket with notebooks, sleek black pens, and a company mug so heavy it could probably survive a small fire. On top of the basket, lying across the tissue paper like a quiet dare, was a single white rose. No note, no card. The stem had been cut short, and the thorns removed with care. I stared at it long enough for my new coworker Tessa Morgan to lean over the divider and whistle. "Okay," she said. "Either Mercer Vale is more romantic than I was led to believe, or someone saw you in reception and immediately lost their mind." Tessa had kind eyes, dark curls pinned up with a pencil, and the warm directness of someone who had survived enough chaos to stop decorating her sentences. She was an account director, 6 years at the firm, and apparently everybody told her things they did not mean to tell her. I knew this within 20 minutes of meeting her. "I vote for company romance policy violation," I said. She laughed. "That's not a no." "It's a first-day flower from some over-enthusiastic vendor," I said, picking up the rose by the stem. It wasn't, and I knew it. Camille had learned to strip thorns because of me. Senior year, I had pricked my thumb on a yellow tea rose while making arrangements at the shop and bled all over the ribbon. Camille had taken the stem from me with a little frown and said, "That seems badly designed," in the dry tone she used when something offended her sense of order. So she spent 20 minutes teaching herself how to shave thorns with a floral knife until my boss kicked her out of the workspace for hovering. After that, she never handed me a rose with thorns still on it. "This place really does move fast," Tessa said. "Usually people wait until at least Thursday to start inappropriate office crushes." "Maybe it's from you." "Sweetheart, if I were bringing you flowers, there would be a card and probably a pastry." I smiled because she seemed to expect one, then set the rose gently beside my monitor and told myself not to be ridiculous. White roses are not rare. Lots of people remove thorns. Lots of people send anonymous flowers. Lots of people are capable of small, meaningless gestures. The problem was that white roses had never meant meaningless to me. When I was 16, before Camille and I ruined each other in all the usual quiet ways, I told her the language of flowers was mostly marketing and Victorian projection, but still fun if you were in the mood to be dramatic. We were in the florist's walk-in fridge, hiding from July heat and her driver, and the kind of life that always seemed to be waiting impatiently for her outside the door. "What do white roses mean?" she asked, touching a bloom as carefully as if it had feelings. "Depends who's selling them. Purity, loyalty, sympathy, new beginnings." I shrugged. "Sometimes apology." She tipped her head. "Flowers can apologize?" "Cowards use flowers to say things they can't stand behind with their own mouths." She had smiled then, the small private smile that made me feel singled out by sunlight. That sounds like something a girl who works in a flower shop would say." "That sounds like something a rich girl says right before she buys half the cooler." "I'm not rich," she said automatically, with the offended dignity of someone whose tuition cost more than my mother made in 6 months. I laughed until she started laughing too, and 3 months later she was kissing me behind racks of ribbon while the compressor hummed, and the world felt, for one impossible season, as if it might bend around us. So no, the white rose on my desk did not feel meaningless. It felt like a hand sliding under a locked door. I dropped it in the trash before lunch. I regretted it by 2 o'clock. The rest of the day was a parade of passwords, process documents, brand architecture decks, by-and meetings designed to evaluate whether I was as sharp in person as I had seemed on paper. I had spent enough years in polished rooms to know how to make my mind look like an asset. I asked precise questions. I mapped strategic risks. I suggested that the Bellwether campaign was trying too hard to sound human and not hard enough to be one. 3 people wrote that down. Camille barely looked at me unless the conversation required it. That should have helped. It didn't. Her restraint felt active, not absent. I could feel her awareness the way you feel heat from an oven without touching the door. At 6:45, after most of the office had emptied into the evening, I was still at my desk trying to untangle a file naming system designed by somebody who either hated language or had recently suffered a personal crisis. Tessa drifted past in a camel coat, saw my screen, and winced. They gave you the archive structure? Brutal. I'm getting a drink with production if you want rescue. I need to prove I'm worth the salary before I develop hobbies. Very strategy of you. She hooked her bag higher on her shoulder. You coming tomorrow? I blinked. To work? She laughed. To the Bellwether site visit in Tribeca. 9 sharp. Wear shoes you can survive a warehouse in. Got it. She hesitated, glanced at the trash bin beside my desk, then back at me. For what it's worth, whoever sent the flower has terrible timing, but excellent taste. When she left, the office softened into after-hours quiet. Monitors dimmed. The city outside turned navy and jeweled. Somewhere down the hall, a copier woke and sighed back to sleep. I was reaching for my coat when Camille's voice came from the doorway of my office nook. You're still here. I turned too fast and nearly hit my knee on the desk. That tends to happen when given 3 years of archives and a smile. She stood with one hand in the pocket of her coat, the other holding a folder against her side. Up close, she looked less untouched than she had in the conference room. Tired, maybe. Or just human in a way she concealed well under fluorescent lighting and authority. The archive structure is terrible, she said. Ah, so it's intentional. A former operations director believed cryptic abbreviations created discipline. And where is this visionary now? Consulting for a tech founder in Zurich, I think, which feels karmically correct. The answer slipped out of me before I could stop it. You still say things like that. Something changed in her face. Not enough to name, just enough to hurt. Do I? I should have let it go. Instead, I heard myself say, I noticed. The silence that followed had shape. History. The kind that stands between 2 people and refuses to be ignored just because they're wearing expensive work clothes. Camille looked at my screen, at the stack of notes beside my keyboard, at everything except me. You don't need to prove your salary by staying after dark on your first day. That's generous, coming from a woman with a reputation for eating underlings who miss deadlines. I don't eat underlings. Tessa will be devastated. Her mouth almost moved. Almost. Then she nodded once, as if filing something away. The Bellwether site visit starts at 9. I'll have the car meet you downstairs at 8:30. I can take the train. I'm aware. Then I'll take the train. At that, she finally looked directly at me. Nora. My name in her mouth hit with the force of memory and the clean violence of being recognized too exactly. I kept my expression steady by sheer spite. The car isn't an indulgence, she said quietly. The clients will already be there. It's a workday. I held her gaze longer than was wise. Right. Of course. She inclined her head. Good night. She was gone before I could decide whether I wanted to call her back and ask the only question that mattered. Why now? Instead, I stood alone in the hush of the office and realized with fresh annoyance that she still smelled the same. Not identical. Age and money and adulthood had refined it into something deeper, but close enough. Orange blossom, cedar, clean paper, winter. The scent had once lived in the collar of a blazer I borrowed for an entire week after she draped it over my shoulders in a movie theater because I was cold and too stubborn to admit it. I went home angry. My apartment was in Astoria, on the fourth floor of a building that believed in stairs as moral instruction. It had decent light, mismatched shelves, a kitchen too small for my ambitions, and a view of another building's brick wall that looked romantic only in rain. It was mine, which still mattered to me in a way I could never fully explain to people who had always assumed space would be available to them. My mother called while I was microwaving dumplings. "How was the palace?" she asked by way of greeting. "That depends. Are we defining palace by square footage or emotional risk?" "Nora, it was good," I said, leaning against the counter. "Beautiful office. Smart people. They seem to like me." "Of course they do." That's very optimistic for a woman who once described advertising as lying in better shoes. "Brand strategy," she corrected, and I stand by the shoes comment. I smiled despite myself. My mother, Elena Reyes, measured trust in labor, not in language. She had cleaned houses, done alterations, answered phones at a dental office, and spent a decade pretending her body wasn't exhausted so mine wouldn't learn the word scarcity too early. When I was younger, she worked nights at Belladonna Florals during wedding season. When I learned flower names before I learned what good credit meant. "Tell me something real," she said. "Not the version you'd tell a landlord." I looked at the rain beginning to stipple the window. "My boss is Camille Mercer." The silence on the line was so immediate it felt rehearsed. Finally, my mother exhaled. "Oh, yeah. You're sure?" She said my name, and all my internal organs filed a complaint. "Oh, so yes." Another silence. My mother had never liked Camille, not even when I was young enough to confuse being dazzled with being safe. She had liked the version of Camille she met in our kitchen once, polite and overcareful, and clearly trying very hard to deserve me. What she did not like was the Mercer part. The family, the money, the school donation plaques, the particular kind of entitlement that dressed itself as concern. "You can quit," she said. I laughed, tired and sharp. "I'm not quitting a six-figure job because my former almost girlfriend became excellent at wearing cashmere." That is not what she was. No, she was not. That was the trouble. "It's fine," I said. "It was 10 years ago." My mother made a small sound that mothers make when they know their children are lying, but choose not to expose it directly. I carried my plate to the tiny table by the window. "There was also a rose on my desk." She went very still. "What kind?" "White." "Oh, honey." I threw it away. Another pause. "Did that help?" "No." "No," she echoed softly. I didn't think so. After we hung up, I stood over the sink with my hands braced on the counter and let myself remember prom for exactly 30 seconds. Because that was as much as I could stand without becoming ridiculous. The silver dress, cheap satin, cool against my knees. The ballroom at the Mercer Grand, all chandeliers and fake stars. The folded note in my clutch where Camille had written Midnight Terrace. Finally, no more hiding. The way her mother stepped into my path instead, pearls and perfect posture, and told me that Camille had come to her senses. The sentence that followed, clean as a blade. "You're a bright girl, Nora, but let's not confuse attention with belonging. You are not good enough for my daughter's life." And worse than that, so much worse, was the fact that Camille had been standing 5 feet away when she said it. She didn't defend me. She didn't come to me. She just stood there, pale and stricken and silent, while humiliation spread through me so hot I thought it might split my skin. People saw. That part mattered. There is a loneliness specific to public rejection. It makes a theater out of your private hope. I washed my plate, took a shower too hot for April, and went to bed telling myself I was not 17 anymore. The next morning, there was another white rose on my desk. This time I didn't throw it away. I stared at it until Tessa appeared with coffee and eyebrows halfway up her forehead. "Okay," she said. "Now I'm invested." Please don't be. Too late. This is my serial drama. I picked up the rose. Again, thorns removed, stem shortened, no note. The bloom was open a little more than yesterday's had been, creamy white with the faintest blush at the center. Maybe it's a building thing, Tessa said. Like some weird luxury office amenity. Water, Wi-Fi, anonymous longing. I almost laughed. That would be on brand. You really have no idea? I looked at the rose, at the exact clean angle of the cut. I have an idea. I just don't have proof. Her expression sharpened with interest, but she was saved from asking by the arrival of 2 junior designers in search of approvals, and I was saved from answering by the convenient fact of being needed elsewhere. The Bellwether site visit took place in a half-finished loft space that smelled like plaster dust, ambition, and a little bit of mildew. Bellwether was launching a hospitality concept for women traveling alone. Stylish, heavily researched, faintly self-congratulatory in the way ventures often are when they discover safety and community can be monetized with the right font. The account was high-profile enough to matter and anxious enough to be exhausting. Camille moved through the site like somebody used to being obeyed without raising her voice. Hard hat, black trousers, impossible posture. She spoke to the clients with a measured confidence that never tipped into performance. She noticed details no one else seemed to register. The sightline from reception, the emotional dead zone by the elevator bank, the reason a certain stone finish would photograph expensive but feel cold. I hated how compelling she was at work. That hatred deepened when she became, inconveniently, kind. At one point, Bellwether's founder, a polished woman named Andrea Bloom, who wore sincerity like couture, turned to me and asked, "Do you think our current language is alienating?" Before I could answer, Vanessa Price, director of accounts, immaculate blowout, smile like lacquer, said, "Nora's just getting up to speed on the client. I can take that." It wasn't overtly rude. That made it worse. Dismissal with plausible deniability is the favorite weapon of women who know exactly how far they can push before someone calls it by its real name. I opened my mouth anyway, but Camille got there first. "No," she said, still studying the renderings on the wall. "Nora should answer. That's why she's here." Vanessa's smile tightened by 0.5 millimeter. I met Andrea's gaze. "Yes," I said. "Not because the intention is bad, because every sentence is trying so hard to reassure women that you've forgotten to sound like one." Andrea blinked. Then slowly, she grinned. "That's exactly what my COO said." Camille glanced at me then, not smiling, but the look itself felt like a pulse of heat. "Good," she said to Andrea. "Then we're diagnosing the right problem." Later, when the clients were distracted by sample finishes and Vanessa was busy pretending to check timelines instead of nursing offense, Tessa leaned into my shoulder and murmured, "Well, she just stabbed Vanessa for you with a vintage letter opener." She defended the work. She defended you in front of a woman who sends people calendar invites as threats. I'm not saying it means anything. I am saying I have eyes. I kept mine on my notebook. Please use them on the floor plan. Tessa snorted, but when she stepped away, I felt it again. That disorienting split between resentment and gratitude, old damage and present evidence. Camille had once protected her family's image by saying nothing while I bled in public. Now she was protecting my credibility in a client meeting with the ease of instinct. I didn't know what to do with that. When the site visit ran long and the weather turned mean, the office car dropped everyone back at headquarters through a curtain of hard spring rain. I stayed later than intended to rework the Bellwether messaging while the adrenaline was still fresh. By 8, only a skeleton crew remained. At 8:30, another rose appeared. This one was blush pink. I found it beside my keyboard when I returned from the restroom, laid across my notes as if it had always belonged there. My pulse stuttered hard enough to annoy me. Pink roses. Gratitude. Admiration. The kind you send when you cannot yet say love out loud. No card. No name. I turned in a slow circle, absurdly expecting to catch someone in the act, but the bullpen was nearly empty. A motion sensor light clicked on near the glass-walled conference rooms and then settled. I should have marched straight to Camille's office. Instead, I picked up the rose, slid it into my bag, and worked another hour with my mind nowhere useful. On the train home, I opened my phone and stared at Camille's name in the employee directory. Executive Creative Director, extension, email, as if any of those practical details could explain why she was speaking to me in flowers, like we were still girls hiding in a cooler, pretending that coded things were safer than honest ones. I did not email her. I did not sleep much either. Over the next 3 weeks, the Roses developed a schedule more intimate than anything I was willing to admit out loud. One on the morning after I stayed late. One after the Bellwether team approved my first strategic draft with the kind of enthusiasm that made Vanessa look briefly unwell. One after Camille sent back a deck with only 4 edits and the devastating note-strong work, which I stared at for a full minute before hating myself for staring. Sometimes white, sometimes blush. Once, to my absolute dismay, a peach rose appeared after I spent an entire meeting arguing that a luxury skincare brand should stop describing women over 40 as ageless, like age were a crime scene. Peach meant appreciation, sincerity, thank you. Whoever was sending them knew exactly how to make me feel foolish. By the 4th rose, I stopped pretending I did not know. There are kinds of knowledge that arrive without proof and settle in the body anyway. The careful removal of thorns. The colors in the exact private order I had once explained to Camille in the flower shop. The timing of them, landing not randomly, but after things that would have mattered to her. My first presentation, a difficult meeting, the day I walked back into the office, pale and shaky after spending my lunch break on hold with an insurance company about my mother's cardiology bills. That last one was white. I came back from the stairwell with my jaw clenched and found the rose resting against my water glass like a small and impossible mercy. I looked up instinctively toward Camille's office. Her blinds were half open. She was standing at her desk, head bowed over a document. Even from across the floor, I could see the tension in her shoulders. It would have been easier if she were careless. Cruel, even. A woman capable of treating pain like a hobby is simple to hate. It's women who are gentle in private and devastating by history who make a mess of you. Tessa noticed the pattern before anyone else because Tessa noticed everything. Okay, she said one Friday evening, dropping into the guest chair by my desk with a carton of noodles and the expression of somebody preparing a public service announcement. You are either secretly dating someone with old money florist trauma, or your desk has become haunted by a very elegant ghost. I don't know what old money florist trauma is. That's because I invented it just now. I capped my pen. I'm busy. How many roses is this? 9. Tessa's eyes widened. You counted. That's what you got from that. 9 flowers over 3 weeks is not a crush. And it's a campaign. I laughed despite myself, then regretted it when her expression softened. You look tired, she said. Because I have a job. Because you look like every flower on your desk arrives with a private weather system. I glanced at the rose lying beside my monitor. Pale pink today. Soft as breath. Tessa followed my gaze. Is it him? I gave her a flat look. I hope after the speeches I've made in this office, no one would insult me by making that assumption. She put a hand over her heart. Forgive me. Is it her? I looked away, which was answer enough. Tessa went still in the very particular way perceptive people do when a puzzle piece clicks into place. Ah, she said quietly. And that's why you go kind of corpse-like every time Camille Mercer says your name. I said nothing. She set her noodles on my desk. Do I get the story? No. Do I get a carefully redacted version that spares me only the details likely to get you fired? No. Do I at least get enough information to know whether I should bring wine or a small axe? That startled a real laugh out of me. The wine would be more useful. Good. I'm a lightweight and an underachiever with weapons. She watched me for a moment. You don't have to tell me. But whatever this is, it's not casual. No, I said, before I could stop myself. It never was. The words hung there between us. Tessa, to her credit, did not lunge toward them. She only nudged the noodle carton closer. Then eat, she said. Complicated desire is easier to survive with carbohydrates. I took the noodles. You say that like a woman with experience. Oh, sweetheart, I work in branding. We all have at least one emotionally devastating ex and a high tolerance for bad decisions. After she left, I ate lukewarm noodles and looked at the rose until the petals blurred. It would have been so easy to confront Camille. Walk into her office, set the bloom on her desk, and say enough. I rehearsed it at least 12 times. I did not do it. Part of me told myself I was protecting my job. And I was to some extent. She was my boss. Whatever had been true when we were 17, now there were contracts and reporting structures and a dozen adult reasons to keep history leashed. But the deeper truth was uglier. I was afraid. Not of her power, of her answer. If she denied it, I would look pathetic. If she admitted it, I would have to decide whether apology and petals counted for anything at all. So I kept working. And the firm, being a living machine built on deadlines and aesthetics and human vanity, kept feeding us reasons to circle each other in sharper and sharper orbits. Bellwether became my account, in all but title. Camille and I spent hours in conference rooms, stripping sentimentality out of messaging and rebuilding it as trust. She was exacting in a way that should have annoyed me more than it did. She didn't let me settle for almost right language. She pushed when a sentence was pretty but lazy, or when a concept was smart without being felt. In front of other people, her feedback was measured and formal. Alone, it became more dangerous. "This is not your best line," she said one evening, leaning over my laptop while rain tracked silver down the windows. "You know that." "I'm aware. That's why I'm still here." Her sleeve brushed my shoulder when she reached for the trackpad. Such a small thing. Such a stupid thing. My entire body registered it with humiliating precision. "It's too defensive," she said, highlighting a sentence. "Bellwether doesn't need to justify its existence. It needs to make women feel anticipated. Because the market is patronizing. Because women are tired." I looked up. She was closer than I expected. Close enough that I could see the tiny line between her brows, the one that appeared when she was focusing too hard or feeling too much. Close enough that I could count her lashes. Close enough to remember exactly how carefully she used to look at me when she wanted to touch me and was waiting for permission. My throat tightened. You always did know how to make a sentence sound like a wound. Something flickered across her face. Not hurt, exactly. Recognition, maybe. Or agreement. "You always knew how to make one tell the truth," she said. The room went very quiet. Then footsteps sounded in the hall, and the moment sealed itself back up, smooth and professional, as if it had never threatened to become anything else. Camille stepped away. I breathed again. We finished the deck in silence. When I got back to my desk, there was a dark pink rose in a slim glass bud vase. No note. I took it home and put it by my bed. The first time jealousy entered the room, it arrived wearing ivory silk and a controlled smile. Her name was Leah Park, and she was Bellwether's external consultant for partnership strategy. Sharp, funny, gorgeous in the composed way women are when they know exactly what red lipstick does to a room. She came to one of our Tuesday meetings with a stack of research and left half the office slightly rearranged. Tessa texted me from 2 seats away. "If she asks for your number in front of Vanessa, I will die happy." I ignored her because Leah was speaking, and because Camille was sitting at the head of the table, looking especially impossible in a charcoal suit. The meeting ran long. Leah stayed after to review language with me while the rest of the team filtered out. "I like the way you cut through nonsense," she said, flipping through my marked-up pages. "Most people in brand strategy think human equals vulnerable voiceover and a woman laughing at salad. That's because they're cowards, I said. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I felt Camille's presence before I saw her. She had remained at the far end of the room gathering her notes, though gathering notes for that long was less an activity than a decision. Leah leaned against the table. Do you want to grab a drink later this week? Strictly professional at first, potentially unprofessional if you're charming in low light. I laughed, startled. That's a bold pitch. I do partnerships. I believe in decisive asks. Across the room, paper stopped moving. I should have said no immediately. Not because I wasn't allowed. I was very much allowed. I was not dating my boss and had no intention of doing anything that would turn my workplace into a Greek tragedy. But something hot and bitter and reckless moved through me, and before I could interrogate it properly, I heard myself say, I might be free Thursday. Leah's smile deepened. Then I'll let you know where. When she left, the room turned strange. Camille stood by the windows with a folder in her hand and the city burning gold behind her. She did not look at me for several seconds. When she finally did, her expression was immaculate. Only the stillness gave her away. Your revisions on the second section were strong, she said. It was so far from what either of us actually wanted to say that I nearly laughed. Thank you, she nodded once. Good night, Nora. I packed my things with infuriatingly steady hands. When I walked back into the bullpen, a single red rose lay on my keyboard. I stopped dead. Of all the flowers she could have chosen, red was the cruelest. Not because it was cliché, because we both knew I had once told her red roses were often used lazily by people who wanted their love to sound inevitable instead of earned. And what do they actually mean? She'd asked. I was wrapping bouquets that afternoon, stems cool against my fingers, her school blazer folded over the back of the chair because she always took it off the minute she got to the shop. Desire mostly, sometimes courage, sometimes I've wanted this for too long. Camille had gone very quiet after that. Now a red rose lay on my keyboard under office fluorescence, and something inside me snapped taut enough to sing. I picked it up and walked straight to her office. Her assistant had already gone. The door was half open. Camille was standing by the bookshelf with her jacket off, sleeves rolled once, reading a brief. She looked up as I entered, and the color drained from her face in a way so quick and controlled another person might have missed it. I closed the door behind me. We stared at each other. Then I put the rose down on the edge of her desk between us. You need to stop, I said. Her gaze dropped to the flower and stayed there. I see. Do you? A beat passed. Yes. It was not a denial. Air left my lungs in a thin, dangerous thread. Then say it. She lifted her eyes to mine. This is not the right setting for honesty? I laughed once without humor. You're right. That would be new for us. Pain flashed across her face so fast I could have imagined it. Nora, she said quietly, I never wanted to unsettle you. That's interesting. Because you've been leaving coded apologies on my desk like we're still children hiding behind flowers instead of talking. Apologies, she repeated, very softly. I folded my arms so she would not see my hands. White, pink, red. Do you think I forgot? Her control slipped then, not dramatically, but enough. Her throat moved. Her fingers tightened against the desk. No, she said. I never thought you forgot. Then what exactly did you think would happen? The question landed. She looked away first. I didn't think beyond wanting to say something without making your first weeks here harder than they already are. I stared at her. Every rose made it harder. Her eyes closed briefly, as if she had known that and done it anyway. I'm sorry. The words should have been satisfying. They were not. They were too small for the room they entered. I shook my head. Don't do that. What? Don't apologize like we're talking about a scheduling mistake. She went utterly still. For one wild second, I thought I might say it all. Prom, her mother, the ballroom, the years I spent trying to become so competent no one would ever again be able to dismiss me as decorative, temporary, lesser. The particular humiliation of discovering that the person who taught you how wanted you can also be the first person to leave you in public. But my anger had never been as simple as speech. It lived deeper than that, under too many practical layers. So I stepped back instead. "No more flowers," I said. "If you have something to say to me, use actual words. Or better yet, say nothing and let me do my job." Camille's face was very pale now. Her usual polish stripped down to something rawer and older. "All right." I hated how quickly she agreed. I hated how some stupid, injured part of me had hoped she would fight harder. I turned for the door. "Nora." I stopped with my hand on the handle. When I looked back, she had not moved from behind the desk. Power had never looked less useful on anyone. "I'm glad you're here," she said. The simplicity of it almost undid me. I left without answering. There were no roses for 4 days. The absence was a kind of noise. I had not realized how thoroughly I had begun to brace myself for that private gesture, how much of my morning had become the tiny, savage check of whether a bloom waited by my keyboard. Without them, the days felt cleaner, easier, more normal. They also felt, to my intense irritation, emptier. It was Thursday when Tessa appeared at my desk in the middle of the afternoon and said, "Your very glamorous consultant is here." I looked up to see Leah near reception, rain on the shoulders of her coat, holding 2 takeaway coffees. She smiled when she spotted me and lifted 1 cup in greeting. "Is that for me?" I asked when she reached my desk. "It is if you still like oat milk." I blinked. "How do you know I—" "You told me during the meeting when Vanessa weaponized the office coffee order to assert dominance." I laughed. "Right." Leah handed me the cup. "I was nearby. Thought I'd rescue you from conference room air. Also, I'm cashing in on Thursday." Her timing was wicked, or perhaps simply observant. Half the office could see her leaning against my desk, beautiful and self-possessed and obviously interested. Tessa, passing with a stack of proofs, gave me an expression so delighted I nearly choked on the first sip. Leah lowered her voice. 7. There's a place in Nolita with criminally low lighting and a bartender who respects women." Before I could answer, another voice cut cleanly through the bullpen. "Nora, a word?" Camille stood at the entrance to the strategy wing, one hand holding a tablet, expression impossible to read. She was not looking at Leah. That somehow made it worse. Leah glanced between us. "Am I in trouble?" "Only if you've rewritten the bellwether budget," I said. Her mouth curved. "Tempting, but no. I'll steal her back in a minute." Camille waited. I set my coffee down. "Excuse me." Her office door closed behind us with deceptive softness. "I need you in the Juniper review at 4:30, she said immediately. "The client moved it." "That's fine. The deck has new data." "I can read." Her gaze sharpened. "I'm aware." The silence that followed was not about the Juniper review. I crossed my arms. Was that all? Camille glanced toward the glass wall, where Leah's blurred shape was still visible at my desk. "Are you going out with her?" I stared at her, genuinely startled. "You brought me in here for an operational jealousy attack?" Color touched her cheekbones so briefly I might have imagined it. "I brought you in here because the meeting moved." "No," I said softly. "You asked me that because you wanted to know." She looked away, which was answer enough. Something reckless rose in me. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the ache of the flowerless week. Maybe it was simply that wanting a woman for 10 years, even when you also resent her, can rot your judgment around the edges. "Yes," I said. "I'm going out with her." Camille's hand tightened once around the tablet. "I see. You keep saying that. This time, I mean it." I should have stopped. I did not. "Good," I said. Then maybe we're finally making progress. For the first time since I'd known her, truly known her, Camille Mercer looked at a loss for words. The sight should have thrilled me. Instead, it felt like watching a violin string pulled too far. The Juniper meeting was a disaster for unrelated reasons involving incoherent data and a client who used the phrase elevated feminine disruption without irony. Camille and I worked side by side through the entire thing, careful and efficient and painfully professional, while my pulse behaved like a traitor. What twice our hands brushed over printed materials. Twice she pulled back so quickly it was almost violent. By the time the meeting ended, I had a tension headache and a text from Leah. Still on for 7? No pressure. I typed yes before I could think better of it. Dinner with Leah should have been uncomplicated. She was smart enough to be interesting, direct enough to be restful, and attractive in a way that did not make me feel like my bones were being rewritten. We ate oysters and fries in a narrow restaurant where everyone looked expensive in a studiedly accidental way. She told me about growing up in Los Angeles with 2 professors for parents and 0 tolerance for nonsense. I told her a curated version of my own history. Queens, Catholic school scholarship, single mother, too much ambition and not enough patience. She laughed at the right things. She touched my wrist once while making a point and let her hand linger just long enough to make it a question. I could have kissed her outside in the rain. I almost did, because she was lovely and wanted me, and nothing in her face carried the ghost of my worst memory. But when she tilted her head and looked at me with invitation in her eyes, all I could think about was another woman in another year, standing on the edge of every choice I made and ruining my timing with her silence. Leah saw it, because some women are kind enough to recognize absence when it enters a room. She smiled, not wounded so much as perceptive. There's someone else. I laughed once, embarrassed. I think there's someone old, which is unfortunately different. Old can be much worse. That sounds like experience. It sounds like lesbians in major cities. She tucked wet hair behind her ear. Do you want honesty? I'm overdue for it. You looked at me like you wanted to want this. That's not the same as wanting it. Her expression gentled. Whoever she is, she still owns too much real estate. I should have denied it. Instead, I looked out at the rain-slick street and said, I hate that you're right. Leah touched my arm, warm and brief. Then don't waste both our time pretending otherwise. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I'm sorry. Don't be. For the record, your mysterious emotional ruin has excellent taste. I groaned. She laughed. We parted with a promise to keep things professional and a genuine hug I liked her for. On the subway home, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and admitted something I had been resisting with embarrassing determination. I did not want another woman. I wanted the one who had already hurt me so thoroughly I had built an adult life around proving I could survive it. That realization should have sent me running. Instead, it made the next morning feel unbearably sharp. There was no rose on my desk. There was, however, a handwritten note rooted through internal mail. Nora, the bellwether copy held because you stayed specific when everyone else wanted sentiment. Thank you. CM. No flower, no perfume, no cardstock prettier than necessary. Just my name in Camille's handwriting for the first time in a decade. I sat down hard. Her handwriting had changed the way everything changes as you grow older and better defended. More controlled, less looping, cleaner under pressure. But the angle was the same. So was the way she wrote my name, like she knew where its softness lived. Tessa leaned over the divider 2 minutes later, saw my face, and said, "Oh, now we're in trouble." I folded the note before she could read it. We are always in trouble. That looked handwritten. It was. From? I gave her a look. Her eyes went very wide and very delighted. Oh no. I think that's the correct response. You're blushing. I'm having a blood pressure event. She sat on the edge of my desk, lowering her voice. Do you want to tell me how bad the history is yet? I looked at the folded note in my hand and heard myself say, "She left me at prom." Tessa's expression changed instantly. Curiosity fell away. What remained was clean, fierce sympathy. "Oh," she said softly. "Nora. That's the streamlined version. I'm sure the unstreamlined version is homicidal." I laughed, but it came out thin. "Her mother told me I wasn't good enough. She stood there and let it happen." Tessa swore, low and heartfelt. "And now she's your boss, leaving roses on your desk?" "Yes. That is either the beginning of a Pulitzer-worthy lesbian novel or a workplace violation with exceptional production values." "Both feel possible." She took a breath. "Do you want advice or just witness?" The question almost undid me because it was so careful. "Witness," I said. "Done." She squeezed my shoulder once. "For the record, anyone who let that happen to you would need to show up with more than flowers." "I know." But even as I said it, I looked again at Camille's note and felt the ground shift under me in some private and inconvenient way. The note lived in my bag for days. I told myself it was only paper. In practice, I unfolded it in grocery lines, on train platforms, once outside a pharmacy while waiting for my mother's refill. "Nora," it said, "the bellwether copy held because you stayed specific when everyone else wanted sentiment." Thank you. CM. There were no more flowers after that. Camille kept her promise. She spoke to me in marked-up decks, in dry comments during reviews, in the particular kind of praise that sounded restrained to everybody else and catastrophic to me. She also became, infuriatingly, more careful. If I skipped lunch, La Tessa arrived at my desk with soup and a look that said, "I know exactly who sent me." If Vanessa tried to sideline me in a meeting, Camille redirected the room so smoothly it barely felt like rescue, only like the natural order of things. She remembered I hated surprise brainstorms. She remembered I liked Earl Grey with too much lemon when a day had gone bad. She remembered far too much for a woman who had once stood silent while I broke. "Your face has become a public warning label," Tessa told me one evening in the sample library. "That's rude." "It's accurate." She slid onto the edge of a work table. The flowers stopped, but somehow this got worse. I stacked paper swatches mostly so I would have something to do with my hands. "She sent a note." Tessa's eyebrows went up. "Handwritten?" "Yes." "That is not a note." "That is escalation." I laughed despite myself. "You're a menace." "I'm an observer of human ruin, which, in this office, is a growth market." Her expression softened. "I'm not saying you owe her anything. I am saying the part of you that wanted to matter to her clearly never packed a bag." That landed where it was meant to. I escaped by claiming a deadline, but her words followed me into the rest of the week, into every measured interaction with Camille, into every stupid pulse jump when she said my name. 3 nights later, I was still at the office after 9, rewriting a Juniper pitch under rain and fluorescent exhaustion, when Camille appeared at the conference room door with a mug in her hand. "You're still here," she said. "So are you." "I own the company. You only own bad boundaries." She held out the mug. Tea. Earl Grey. Too much lemon. I stared at it. "That's unfair." "I know." "You remember this?" Her mouth moved faintly. "Nora." I took the mug because refusing it would have been theater. She stayed a careful distance away, rain sliding silver down the glass behind her. "Why did you really ask for my interview?" I asked. Camille's gaze lifted to mine and held. "Because your work is exceptional." That's the official answer. It's also true. And the unofficial one? She exhaled slowly. "Because I saw your name and realized I had one chance to meet you again in a room where leaving would not be the final image." The sentence landed like a blow and a balm at once. "That's not fair," I said. "No." Her voice was quiet. "Nothing about us is fair." She was right, which made me want to throw the tea at a wall on principle. The office swelled toward the anniversary gala after that, all place cards and lighting plans and collective nerves. Every deck included the venue name, the Mercer Grand, until it felt less like a hotel and more like a test. I had not been back there since prom. My body knew it before my mind did. I slept badly. I snapped at a printer. I spent 10 minutes one afternoon staring at a ballroom render while my pulse acted like it had somewhere urgent to be. "You can skip it," my mother said when I called her the night before. "No one gets a medal for attending a trauma site in heels." "I'm not letting a room win." She was quiet a second. "Then don't go in there trying to be brave. Go in there already knowing who you are." It was an irritatingly good line. I hated when she did that. The gala began in layers of black fabric, glassware, and weaponized elegance. I wore a dress Tessa called dangerously competent. The Mercer Grand looked exactly as memory had preserved it, and nothing like it at all. Renovated chandeliers, darker wood, same staircase, same terrace doors, same polished floor where I had once stood in silver satin and learned that humiliation can have excellent acoustics. I stopped just inside the ballroom. Camille appeared at my side with terrifying timing. "If you need to step out," she said quietly, "step out." "I'm not leaving." Her eyes searched my face. "That isn't what I asked." I swallowed. "I know." For 1 second, we stood there in the same air as our worst version and our newest one. Then the event swallowed us whole. Work saved me for the first hour. A gala is still logistics with better fabric. I corrected cue cards, rescued a seating disaster, rewrote 2 founder intros, and approved a floral adjustment that made me think dark thoughts about hydrangeas. Tessa moved through the room like a benevolent storm. Camille charmed donors, steadied executives, and somehow still noticed every time I stopped breathing. Then Veronica Mercer walked in. Age had touched her lightly. Silver at the temples, pearls at her throat, the same beautiful posture that once made cruelty look like etiquette. She saw me almost immediately. Recognition crossed her face with no softness in it. Tessa materialized beside me with a champagne flute. "Do you need me to spill this on her?" That is the kindest question anyone has asked me all month. Veronica crossed the room anyway. "Ms. Reyes," she said when she reached me. "You've done remarkably well." I looked at her and felt every year I had spent becoming bulletproof rise behind my ribs. "You said something very similar the last time I saw you, and it meant something uglier." Her smile cooled. "I'm not here to revisit adolescence." Convenient. Camille arrived then, her face drained of color. "Mother." Veronica ignored her. "I only meant success suits you." "Success suited me before your approval existed," I said. She inhaled once, annoyed now. "You were always very proud." "Not proud, just not purchasable." That made her eyes sharpen. "You mistake old concern for malice?" "No," I said. "I mistake polished cruelty for concern." The room around us tightened. Conversations lowered. Nearby donors developed sudden interest in their drinks. Camille stepped between us, not dramatically, just enough that the line of her body answered a decade-old question. "That's enough," she said to her mother. Veronica finally looked at her. "You've always had a weakness for difficult women." Camille's expression went cold in a way I had never seen before. "No, my weakness was believing you understood love." Veronica's face changed by one precise degree. Shock, fury, something like shame. "You will not speak to Nora like that again," Camille said. No raised voice, no spectacle, just a clear public choosing. Veronica looked from her daughter to me and found no retreat that preserved her dignity. She turned and left without another word. I stood very still, because if I moved too quickly, something inside me might crack open in public. Camille looked at me. The terrace after my remarks. I should have said no. Instead, I heard myself say, "Fine." Her speech would have been respectable to everyone else in the room. Memory, design, being anticipated before you have to ask. To me, it sounded like a woman trying to turn remorse into architecture and hoping I would hear the original blueprint inside it. By the time the applause ended, I was already pushing through the terrace doors into cold night air. This was where I had waited for her at 17, with a note in my clutch and too much hope in my body. Midnight terrace. Finally, no more hiding. The door opened behind me. Camille joined me a moment later and closed it softly. "Tell me everything," I said. She stood a few feet away, hands empty at her sides. My father found the note before we left the house. He had been reading my phone for weeks. In the car, he told me that if I met you publicly that night, he would pull your scholarship by morning and have your mother fired from the Grand. He had already delayed the board signatures. He said I would ruin your future and you would hate me for it. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "So you chose for me?" "Yes," she said without flinching. "I made a terrified, arrogant choice for you. Then my mother found you before I got back inside." The wind moved her hair over one shoulder. She looked suddenly younger and more exhausted at once. "What do you mean before you got back inside?" "My father locked me in the car." Her voice stayed level in that frightening way people use when speaking about old violence. "I broke the back window with a trophy from the trunk. That's the scar on my hand." By the time I got into the ballroom, she had already said it. I closed my eyes. "She did it in front of me on purpose," Camille said, "because she knew if she made it cruel enough, I might lose my nerve to come after you." "I did come after you, Nora. I just came too late to stop the part that mattered." The sentence landed low and hard. "My mother said you came to our apartment," I said. "I did. She told me to leave. She was right." She was furious. So was I. Camille's mouth tightened. At them, at myself, at the fact that fear had already done enough damage to make your mother look at me and see the danger clearly. I pressed my hands against the cold stone rail. "And the scholarship?" "My aunt forced the signatures through that night. I paid the money back later when I had access to my trust. But the point was to make sure my father couldn't hold your life over either of us again." I stared at her. 10 years. 10 years of believing she had simply chosen her family's comfort over me. 10 years of building myself against that version of her, because simpler stories are easier to survive. Now, here she was. Not innocent, not absolved, but so much more specific and devastated than the villain my pain had preferred. "And the roses?" I asked. Her eyes dropped briefly to the terrace floor, then back to me. "Because flowers were ours before anything else was. Because I remembered every private meaning. White for apology, pink for admiration, peach for thank you, yellow for stay, red for wanting that had outlived good judgment. I thought, if I started there, if I gave you something you could throw away if you wanted, I might be able to say, 'I'm sorry,' without forcing you to answer." Every rose felt like a confession she was too afraid to make. I looked away toward the city because looking at her had started to hurt in a newer, less useful way. "Do you understand what that night did to me?" I asked. "Not from inside your skin," she said. "But I know what I saw. I know I let the person I loved feel small and public and disposable. I know you built your life with that wound under everything, because I built mine with the knowledge that I put it there." Something in my chest gave way, just enough to be dangerous. "I spent years trying to become enough," I said. "Enough polish, enough authority, enough room-commanding competence that no one could ever talk to me like that again. Every good thing I built felt like arguing with your mother in a language she respected more than kindness." Camille's face changed as if each word were landing physically. "Nora." "And the most humiliating part," I went on, because if I stopped now, I might never finish, "was that some part of me still wanted you to know, wanted you to see I had become enough, which made me hate myself, because I didn't want your measure in me anymore." Her eyes filled. She didn't hide it. You were never the measure, she whispered. You were the answer I failed. I laughed, and the sound broke in the middle. You really don't know how to make anything less devastating, do you? No. Her voice was shaking now. I only know how to tell you the truth before I lose my nerve. The city glittered below us. Behind the glass, music and silverware and donor laughter continued with offensive normalcy. I looked at the woman in front of me, the scar in her hand, the grief in her mouth, the impossible self-control barely holding around what she felt. I thought of every morning rose, every quiet act of care, every time she had protected my dignity without making a show of it, as if she understood that public correction cannot undo public shame, but private steadiness can begin to answer it. Did you ever stop loving me? I asked. The question came out before pride could stop it. It hung in the air, naked and impossible to retrieve. Camille did not hesitate. No. It should have felt theatrical. It didn't. It felt like gravity naming itself. I hate that, I whispered. I know. There you go again. A tiny, broken smile touched her mouth. Then let me say it better. I have loved you in every city I've lived in. I have loved you through every good thing I built and every mistake I made trying not to build my life around a ghost. I have loved you quietly because loud love was once turned into leverage against you, and I swore I would never again let what I felt become a weapon in your life. My eyes burned. I let them. There are only so many years you can spend performing composure before truth starts to seem cleaner. I still love you too, I said. That's the part I resent most. Camille inhaled like the sentence itself had touched her. I do not deserve another chance, she said. I know that. But if there is any future in which I can earn even your ordinary trust, I will spend the rest of my life grateful to be trying. I took one step toward her. She went perfectly still. Don't make this neat, I said. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. This is not forgiveness wrapped in good lighting. I don't need neat, she said softly. I need true. So I kissed her. Not delicately, not like a pardon. Like a woman who had spent 10 years trying to cauterize a feeling and was tired of pretending the wound did not still have heat in it. Camille made a sound against my mouth that was all relief and grief at once. Her hand came to my face so carefully I could have cried from that alone. When the kiss deepened, it did so with reverence, not entitlement. She kissed like a woman who had learned exactly what it costs to mishandle what she loves. When we broke apart, I was shaking. Camille pressed her forehead to mine. Nora. Don't leave me standing alone this time, I whispered. Her breath caught. Never again. Inside, the band shifted into something slow and old-fashioned. I glanced through the glass at the dance floor and then back at her. You promised me a dance on this terrace once, I said. Pain and wonder crossed her face together. I remember every word. Then dance with me. She took my hand like it was something holy and drew me close. Under the city lights, above 30 floors of other people's lives, we moved in a slow circle with no witnesses but night. It wasn't teenage redemption. It was better. Adult. Earned. Full of all the things we knew now about fear and class and what silence costs. Her hand at my waist was steady. Mine on her shoulder trembled once and then settled. At one point, I laughed because the whole thing was too emotional and I needed air. Camille smiled into my hair. There, she murmured. Yellow rose accomplished. I smiled before I could stop myself. We went back inside separately, because a gala still had to end and the world did not owe us a private soundtrack. But something had changed that could not be disguised. Not by distance, not by titles, not by either of our talent for restraint. The next week, we restructured reporting lines. Tessa became my direct lead on Bellwether with so much efficiency I suspected she had drafted the solution herself days earlier. I'm not saying I manifested this, she said, dropping a revised org chart on my desk. I am saying my emotional forecasting remains undefeated. You're unbearable, and yet indispensable. Leah texted me that Friday with only 4 words: posture damage repaired or no. I made the mistake of reading it while Camille was in my office doorway reviewing a timeline. She saw my face. Good news? She asked. Leah Park would like a progress memo. Camille's mouth did something dangerously close to a real smile. Tell her the infrastructure is stabilizing. I stared at her. You are impossible. And still, apparently, your type. That one made me laugh so suddenly I had to sit down. We took it slowly because anything else would have felt like disrespect. Coffee before work at a cafe 6 blocks from the office, walks after late meetings, her hand finding mine only when we were already alone. The first time she came to my apartment for dinner, she stood in my tiny kitchen chopping garlic with the concentration of a surgeon, while my mother called midway through and said, without subtlety, "Oh, so, that's the woman?" in Spanish, loud enough for half-queens to hear. Camille understood enough to blush. It was extremely satisfying. My mother met her for real 2 Sundays later. It was tense, honest, and not nearly as disastrous as I had feared. When my mother said, "You don't get to hurt her again and call it complexity," Camille answered, "I understand," with such clean seriousness that even I felt it. After dinner, my mother sent her home with leftovers. In our family, that was not forgiveness. It was, however, a border opening. The first night Camille stayed over happened after a storm and too much takeout and one kiss on my couch that turned into several more. Nothing explicit, nothing careless, just the slow rediscovery of mouths, hands, the fact that being wanted can feel different when it is no longer hidden. At some point, she tucked a blanket over my legs before kissing me again, and I laughed against her mouth. "You're gentle when no one's looking," I said. Her expression changed. I wasn't once. You are now. That seemed to matter to her more than I expected. She looked at me like I had offered something far larger than the words themselves. When we finally fell asleep, rain against the windows, and her arm warm around my waist, I woke once in the dark and realized I was not waiting for abandonment, just morning. By early summer, the office had almost adapted to us. Or perhaps they were simply too elegant to make a spectacle of what was obvious. Tessa stopped pretending surprise. Vanessa grew frostier, which I took as a civic good. Camille and I became better at existing in professional spaces without starving each other of warmth. She no longer hid every glance. I no longer treated each one like a threat. Then, one late afternoon after a leadership review and a brutal but satisfying day, I found a single deep red rose on my desk. I looked up automatically toward Camille's office. There was a card this time. No more anonymity. Camille. I took the flower into her office after the floor had thinned out. She was gathering papers, jacket off, city light turning the windows gold behind her. That seems pointed, I said, holding up the card. I was aiming for clarity. For a woman who once hid behind botany, this is disturbingly direct. I'm trying to improve. I came around the desk and set the rose down between us. You know, when I told you years ago that cowards use flowers to say things they can't stand behind with their own mouths, I didn't expect you to spend a decade proving me both wrong and right. Camille's eyes held mine. Then let me do it properly. She came closer, slow enough for me to stop her if I wanted. I didn't. I love you, she said. No coded language, no strategic restraint. Not as apology, not as nostalgia. As the truest thing in my life, even when I was too afraid and too young to protect it well. The room went very quiet. I touched her face because suddenly I needed to. That's better. A soft, incredulous laugh escaped her. Good. I love you too, I said, and I'm still going to argue with you. I would worry if you didn't. Excellent. Then we understand each other. When she kissed me, it was in the middle of her office with the city burning gold outside and no secrecy left in the room. Her hand slid to my waist. Mine caught in the back of her shirt. For one suspended second, there was no ballroom, no staircase, no note folded in a teenage clutch. Only the woman I had loved longest, finally saying it with her whole life instead of with flowers. Later, when we left the office together, she pressed the rose into my hand and asked, "My place or yours?" I looked at her, at the elegant mouth that had finally learned directness, at the scar on her hand, at the tenderness she no longer treated like contraband. "Mine," I said. "But you're making breakfast." A smile warmed her whole face. "I can do that." "I know," I said, and this time the words meant something beautiful. She opened the car door for me and waited until I was inside before circling around to sit beside me. When her hand found mine in the dim back seat, there was no audience. No mother with pearls. No girl left alone under borrowed stars. Just the quiet miracle of discovering that the love I had spent years trying to outrun had survived shame, silence, and time, and that I had never needed to become enough for her to choose me. I always was.